Hey everyone, and welcome back to the PTG Rail Routes Learning series. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at the Conwy Valley Line, which is made by Backdated Train Sim as an extension to the North Wales coastal route. And I'm going to be driving train 2 Delta 15, which is the 11:35 service from Blaenau Ffestiniog through to Llandudno for a total journey distance of around 31 miles. Our stops along the way, if I can pronounce all of these correctly, my Welsh pronunciations aren't always the best, but our stops will be Dolwyddelan, Betws-y-Coed, Llanrwst, North Llanrwst, Llandudno Junction, Deganwy, and finally Llandudno. The train that I'm driving on this journey today is the Class 150/2, which probably needs very little introduction for anyone who follows my channel, but I'm going to just briefly introduce the train for people who may be new to my videos or haven't watched a video with the Class 150 in the past. So the Class 150 has been in service since 1984 and was manufactured by Brel York between 1984 and 1987, with a total of 137 units produced in 3 different subclasses. They have a maximum speed of 75 miles per hour, though between here and Llandudno Junction the maximum speed limit is only 45 miles per hour, and we might just about be able to get up to maybe 50 between Llandudno Junction and Llandudno. Each unit, the coaches on each unit are 65 feet 10 inches long, which is 20.06 meters. The weight of each unit is 35.8 metric tons, and the engine power output is 286 horsepower with 2 axles driven per car with a Voith hydraulic T211R transmission. Now in the cab of the train, let's just quickly set up here ready for departure. So what I need to do now is press Shift and W to turn the master key. Now that I've done that, I'm going to move the reversing handle into the neutral position and reset the AWS TPWS self-test sequence. The next thing I'm going to do now is press Ctrl and D to turn on the driver safety device, I for the instrument lights. Now let's just go over here. I've just got to set up, so I'm going to turn off the tail lights, turn on the destination indicator, and now I'm going to press Shift and H to put the headlights into the daytime setting. I think it's Shift and H. I'll double check that in a minute once we're outside the train. And I also want to turn on the marker lights there, so I'll just turn the marker light switch. Let's just quickly look at the controls here. So in front of us, just slightly to the left of centre, is the brake handle, which is a standard West-Coed 3-step brake. So you've got the release position, step 1, step 2, and step 3, which is full service. There is of course an emergency position above that, but you really shouldn't be using that when driving unless it actually is an emergency. Now in front of us here we've got the horn control, which is a 2-toned horn, controllable with the space bar and the B key. Just above that we've got the brake gauges, so what we're really looking at is the needle on the right hand side. As I now reduce the braking, you can see that needle falls. When that needle is pointing at 0, then the brakes are released, and the higher the needle is pointing, then the harder the brakes are applied. Just to the right of that we've got the speedometer, as already mentioned, measured in miles per hour, and it's a very easy to read speedometer on this unit, which I really like, and I think it translates well into videos as well, so you can easily see what speed I'm travelling at. Now just below that we've got the power controller with 7 notches of power. When I start the train moving, I'll generally go straight from off to notch 3, and then I'll wait until we're just moving maybe 4 or 5 miles per hour before jumping up to notches 4 and 5, and then once we're doing closer to 10 to 15 miles per hour, I'll then go up to full power. The one final thing we need to look at here is the GSM radio. So I am going to set this up, but I don't actually know what signal we're at, as the signals don't seem to have numbers around here. So I'm just going to do the data entry key here. So I need to type in the train's head code, which is 2 Delta 15. So if I depress the 2, click on that, and now press 3, which will give us the letter D, and now we want 1 and 5, and now at this point you'd normally enter the signal number of the signal in front of you. As I don't know what that is, I'm just going to enter 001, and now I'm just going to tick that off, and so that's now registering us on the GSM system, and we're now registered as train 2 Delta 15. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the windows here, as it's much nicer to be able to hear the engine noises, and also you can hear the noise of the wind rushing past as we're moving, which I just think adds to the sensation of speed. So now we've set up the cab ready for departure, we now need to go outside the train to change the destination display on the front to read Llandudno. So now we're looking at the front of the train. We can actually cycle through the destinations available with the F7 and F8 keys. So I'm just going to hold F8 until we get our destination up. It certainly takes quite some time, as there's a very long list of destinations for us to scroll through. So I've gone as far away as Birmingham there. Oh, there we are. We just went past it, so when I can get that right when it's not jumping. There we are, finally. It seemed to just keep jumping back to Bangor as I was trying to get it to stick at Llandudno. So the destination display is now set, and as you can see we do have the daytime headlights on. I did say I was going to check that once we came outside the train. So now we're pretty much all set up, ready for departure on our journey towards Llandudno. Departing away from Blaenau Ffestiniog, the speed limit here is currently 20 miles per hour, and we've got around 6 3/4 miles to go to our first stop, which is Dolwyddelan. So I've idled the power a bit below 20 miles per hour here, as we're now about to start on a 1 in 70 downward gradient. So the train's quickly now going to coast up to 20 miles per hour. And I'm going to have to use the brakes for a moment just to control our speed to ensure that we don't end up breaking the speed limits. I'd like to issue a correction there. It was actually down 1 in 100 the gradient, and we're now going up at 1 in 70, which means I now need to increase the power to ensure that we don't end up losing too much speed. We're now passing Blaenau Ffestiniog North, which I believe might be a closed station. Currently got the throttle in notch 3, which seems to be holding us at just below 20 miles per hour. Just after this crossing here, the grade is going to shallow a little to 1 in 80. So I'm going to probably need to reduce the power slightly because our speed might just increase to just above 20 miles per hour. I'm just going to keep a close eye on the speedometer to make sure that we don't end up speeding. So I went down to notch 2 of power just for a moment, and now I'm back up to notch 3, and that should be pretty much okay for now, though the speed limit will actually be going up very shortly to 30 miles per hour. As you can see, the speed limit is just going up to 30 miles per hour now as we enter the over 2 mile long Ffestiniog tunnel. So I'm now just going to accelerate up towards 30. The gradient's also shallowed to 1 in 660. And so once we're at 30 miles per hour, I need to go between notches 1 and 2 of power to maintain the speed. So at a speed of 30 miles per hour of tunnel of this length, it's going to take us about 4 to 5 minutes to actually traverse the entire length of the tunnel. As mentioned in my previous video, the Betws-y-Coed route, I'm actually looking now to make a US route learning video very soon, as I realise it has been quite a while since I did one. So I'm hoping to do the Morristown line, which is part of the New Jersey transit area. I drove a journey of that recently, which is very enjoyable, and I thought it would be nice to cover that route in a video. I'm also hoping to do a US freight journey soon, though I'm undecided which route that will be on yet. And I finally sorted out the issues I was having with the train for my Marias Pass journey with the sound packs. So actually, when I was loading the scenario to try and record it, it just kept crash dumping the game, and I think that I've now solved that problem. So hopefully I'll be able to do the promised Marias Pass route in the not too distant future. I've also started writing the script for the next scripted video, which will be a route guide to the Great Eastern Main Line, giving the history of the route between London-Liverpool Street and Norwich. And the next British route learning video that I'm planning to do, which should be coming up very soon indeed, that will be the route between Blackpool North and Preston on the Freeware Vulcan Productions route. Hoping to cover that journey using the class 158. Shouldn't be too much longer now until we reach the end of this tunnel, and once we do so, then we're going to be immediately on a downward gradient of 1 in 80, and in fact we're going to be on a gradient of between down 1 in 62 and 1 in 90, all of the way to the next stop at Dolwyddelan. So I'm going to be having to use the brakes quite considerably to control our speed on the descent. Personally, I'm not a fan of driving long distances downhill like this. I find it quite annoying when you've got to constantly be using the brakes, but I guess it does at least give you a little more to do. So let's see how I manage this. I'm going to be going between 25 and 30 miles per hour. I've just started on the downward gradient now. So I'm making an immediate brake application. I'm going to bring our speed down to 25 miles per hour at this point. And then once we're down to 25, I'm going to release the brakes until we've coasted back up to 30. And I'm just going to have to keep sort of repeating this cycle as we travel towards Dolwyddelan. This is actually a route that I've travelled in real life, I think twice now, all of the way from Llandudno to Blaenau Ffestiniog and back. I haven't actually travelled on the Ffestiniog Railway yet though I do hope to do so in the future. So the Ffestiniog Railway is a narrow gauge steam railway which runs from Blaenau Ffestiniog to Porthmadog. And so yeah, this is quite a nice route to travel on, I think. The scenery is very nice when you're going through the hilly Welsh countryside. I don't think we're quite in Snowdonia at this point, but we're not too far from Snowdonia, which is of course a very mountainous part of Wales. So I've been to Blaenau Ffestiniog and I've also been to Betws-y-Coed, which is our second stop on this journey. We're now coming up on Roman Bridge Station with 1 3/4 miles to go. Now got a warning for a speed restriction of 20 miles per hour just coming up. The warning post there is actually a quarter of a mile from the speed limit, and it's a third of a mile from our stop. So I'm just leaving the brakes in step 1 for now to bring our speed down. You can just see the 20 mile per hour speed post coming up there. Also see the platform ahead. The gradient actually levels out once we enter the platform here, and so we won't have any problems with the downward gradient affecting our braking. So here at Dolwyddelan, I'm aiming to stop by the class 150 stop sign. There's 2 stop signs, one for a single coach class 153 and the other for a 2 coach class 150. So just passing the class 153 stop sign, you can just see the 150 stop sign coming up. And we should now be stopping in just about the right place. Departing away from Dolwyddelan, the starting speed limit here is 20 miles per hour, though as you can see it's very quickly going back up to 30 miles per hour. And at this point we've got 5 3/4 miles to go to our next stop, which is at Betws-y-Coed. At this point we are still on a level grade for a moment, though there will be a gradient change to a gradient of down 1 in 120 coming up fairly shortly, and once we're back on the downward gradient I'm once again going to need to use the brakes to control our speed. Just for a moment, I've just idled the power to allow the train to coast. I don't think we're going to lose too much speed in that time, and it just means that I've got a little bit of leeway for when I need to apply the brakes once we've started again on the downward gradient. And you can actually see there's a gradient change just here, so this is where the downward gradient begins. And I'm now prepared to use the brakes, so as soon as we've reached 30 miles per hour I'll go back to the process that I was going through before, though as the gradient is actually slightly shallower than it was previously, I shouldn't need to brake quite as frequently as I was doing before we reached the previous stop. So we just reached a temporary level grade as we went through the tunnel just there. Then we're going to be starting to go back downhill in a moment. In fact, the gradient's going to get quite steep along here as we pass Ponty Pant, which is the next station that we're going to pass. The gradient's going to get as steep as 1 in 47. passing Pontypant Station. Probably noticed the rather significant gradient change there. So we're now on the 1 in 47 downgrade, and as a result of that, the train's certainly going to accelerate very quickly when not using the brakes. But the opposite effect, of course, is that because it's such a steep downward gradient, the train really isn't slowing down all that quickly when I do apply the brakes, which means that I don't have to keep adjusting the brakes maybe quite as frequently still as I was before. About to cross rather a long underbridge here. I think it might be a viaduct, but at this point we've got 2.5 miles to go to our next stop. At the tunnel that we just passed, we had 1¼ miles to go. So with these two overbridges just here, we've now got around ½ mile to go, so I've got to prepare to stop in a moment. As we approach Betws-y-Coed, there's actually two parts to the platform. The first part is closed, so we don't need to stop at that point. But that's a good indicator, of course, that we're getting very close to the point where we need to stop. And so once we've entered the first half of the platform, I'm going to make sure that I brought our speed down to enter the main part of the platform at no faster than 20 miles per hour. So we're now entering the closed part of the platform here. We've now entered the main part of the platform, and as you may have noticed, the speed limit has just gone up to 45 miles per hour. And here at Betws-y-Coed, I'm aiming to stop at the S sign, which is just on our left. It's actually very difficult to judge when you're next to it, when you're in the cab of this train. But this should be roughly the correct stopping point. Departing away from Betws-y-Coed, the starting speed limit here is 45 miles per hour, with 3¼ miles to go to our next stop, which is Llanrwst. Between here and the next stop there are no downward gradients, so it's very nice to know that we're actually able to drive with the power on and not having to use the brakes to constantly control the speed. So we're actually going up at the minute at 1 in 188, and as we get towards 45 miles per hour, I need to go between notches 3 and 4 of power to control the speed. I've actually just had to reduce the power, as once you reach around 45 miles per hour, there's something that happens. I think it's the fluid coupling or fluid converter, I can't remember off the top of my head, but whereas previously the power controller directly controlled the engine RPM, once you reach this point it can be the case that instead the engine RPM is then tied to the speed of the train as it is at present, because we just reached that sort of changeover speed between the two types of transmission. I might go into much more detail about these transmission types in a train guide on this train. I think a train guide would actually be quite interesting because it's featured so much on the channel, to really go into the history and really go into the technical details of how this train works. Now coming up on a 30 mile per hour speed warning, which is half a mile from the speed limit itself. At this point I'm now going to shut off the power to allow the train to coast. I'm going to start applying the brakes in a moment as we reach the upcoming overbridge ahead. Just a little bit before the overbridge there, just in a step 1 brake application, which has brought our speed down quite nicely. You can now see the platform just coming up here. Here at Llanrwst I need to stop at the 150 stop sign, which is near the end of the platform. So we should now be stopped in about the right place. Departing away from Llanrwst, the speed limit here is currently 30 miles per hour, and as you can see we've got a warning for an upcoming 15 mile per hour speed restriction, with half a mile to go to the next stop, which is North Llanrwst. Reached 30 miles per hour, I've shut off the power to allow the train to coast. I'm going to need to brake shortly because there is a speed restriction of 15 miles per hour which comes into force before we enter the platform. Brakes slightly late there. I thought it was slightly further up the speed restrictions, so just for a brief moment I was actually braking the speed limit. Unfortunately, does happen occasionally. Here at North Llanrwst, I'm aiming to stop at the 150 stop point near the end of the platform. Just see it coming up on the left there. We should now be stopping in just about the right place. As we depart away from North Llanrwst, the speed limit here is currently 15 miles per hour, with 11.25 miles to go to our next stop at Llandudno Junction. But before that, we've actually got to stop next to the signal box just ahead for a token exchange, which has been implemented into the scenario. So tokens are something that the driver takes from the signalman, and when you're in possession of the token, then only the driver in possession of the token is allowed to take the train along a single track section. So you can just see the signalman standing outside the box there. I'm going to stop just next to him until I'm told that I'm able to proceed further. So now we're just awaiting the token exchange. In real life, I've seen token exchanges done actually with the train not fully stopped, just going at a slow speed to swap tokens with the signalman. And we should be able to go any moment. Okay, so we've got the right of way here. So now we can depart and head towards Llandudno Junction. So now we're reaching 15 miles per hour. Let's shut off the power just to allow the train to coast. As you can see, the speed limit here is going up to 45 miles per hour, and that's going to be the speed limit for most of the way to Llandudno Junction, with a couple of speed changes in between. We're currently in notch 3 of power, and that seems to be pretty much maintaining the speed at around 45 miles per hour. I'm just going to keep an eye on that to be certain. There will be coming up soon a warning for an upcoming 30 mile per hour speed restriction. The warning is only just over a third of a mile from the limit itself. See the warning board coming up just ahead, so I've idled the power at this point to allow the train to coast. I'm going going to prepare to brake for the upcoming 30 limit in a moment. Just trying to see if I can see the post in the distance. And I can now see just in the very distance there the 30 mph speed post. Probably slowed down a little too early, but it's always, as I say, better to slow down too early than too late. At this point, I'm just going to allow the train to coast at 30 mph, and in the not too distant future now, the speed limit will be going back up to 45. We're now passing the 45 mph speed post, so I can now increase the power to accelerate back up towards 45. And coming up shortly, we will be passing the site of Dolgarrog station. Once again back in notch 3 of power, which seems to be holding us to around 45 mph. We're now coming up on a fixed distance signal board, which in this case is actually because there's a crossing we're coming up to in a moment where trains are told to stop and sound the horn before proceeding. This is something that's not marked on the HUD, but I've decided to do it just to increase the realism on this journey. So I'm just preparing now to stop in front of the crossing which is coming up ahead, which is in the area of Ballycafn station. Just to point out, it's not this crossing that you can see just coming up. I believe it's the following crossing on the right hand curve here. So I'm just looking out, and then you'll see the stop board. I'm going to stop in front of that, sound the horn, and then I can accelerate once again. I'm really not quite sure why you needed to do that at this crossing, as I can see it is guarded with gates, but I was just following what the sign said. So we're now passing the site of Ballycafn station. coming up on the site of Conwy station. So just past a 30-mile-per-hour speed warning, and that warning is around 2/3 of a mile from the speed limit, with this signal just here half a mile from the speed limit, so I'm going to coast at this point, and I'm going to start braking for the upcoming 30-mile-per-hour speed restriction at the next left curve. I do also need to keep an eye on the signals here as we're approaching the main line just before Llandudno Junction, and it's likely that I'm going to get a red signal, but when I did my practice run along here I did not get a yellow signal. I just went straight from a green signal to the next signal being red with no warning, which is something that I just don't think would normally happen in real life, and I can see now that the signal ahead is indeed displaying a red aspect. So it's obviously a slight problem with the signalling here as we approach Llandudno Junction, which hopefully might be fixed in a future update. And so now I'm just going to have to stay stopped in front of this signal until the signal clears. I'm going to turn on the driver reminder appliance there as well. And now I'm just going to jump ahead to when the signal clears, as there's a 5 to 10 minute wait here, which I don't think will be too interesting in the video. Now the signal has cleared, we are cleared into Llandudno Junction station, and the speed limit here is still 30 miles per hour. Now that we've reached 30 miles per hour, I've just shut off the power. I'm going to allow the train to coast now all of the way into the station. Just after joining the main line here, the speed limit does actually go up to 50 miles per hour. There's certainly no point in accelerating to that, considering how close ahead the station is. Here at Llandudno Junction, I'm aiming to stop at the 3-car stop sign, which is under the bridge that you can see coming up. Departing away from Llandudno Junction, the starting speed limit here is 50 miles per hour, though it is very quickly dropping to 15 miles per hour, with just under 1.5 miles to go to our next stop, which is Deganwy. I'm now going to shut off the power here at around 20 miles per hour and make sure that I've braked down to 15 before we cross a point, turning to the right, which will be coming up in a moment. So I'm now down to 15 miles per hour, and you can just see the point here. I'm just going to allow the train to coast at 15 until we can accelerate further. Now, some of the speed posts between here and Llandudno don't seem to have been put in correctly for this direction, and I'm actually going to be accelerating at the rear of speed posts for the opposite direction, using them as the landmark to know where I can accelerate. The speed limit is now about to go up to 20 miles per hour. You can just see there's a post just coming up on the right hand side there, and that's actually the 20 mile per hour speed post, so I can accelerate up towards that in a moment, just as we've crossed this point here. And now at the AWS ramp that we just crossed, the speed limit went up to 50 miles per hour, so I can now start accelerating up towards that. So I'm going to accelerate now until we're doing around 40 miles per hour, and then I'm going to idle the power to allow the train to coast, as the speed limit drops to 35 miles per hour just after we've reached the next signal. I'm now braking for the upcoming 35 limit, and as the limit drops to 35, we've then got a quarter of a mile to go to Deganwy. So you can see we've actually got the speed post there just on the right, which was facing the correct direction for this speed change. At Deganwy, I couldn't see a clear stopping point where we need to stop, so I'm just aiming to stop around halfway along the platform. So we should hopefully be stopping in just about the right place. Departing away from Deganwy, the speed limit here is currently 35 miles per hour, though it is soon going up to 50 miles per hour, with 2¼ miles to go to our next and final stop at Llandudno. Speed limit is now going up to 50 miles per hour at this point. As we saw the 35 mile per hour speed post just on the right, I was actually accelerating slightly too early there, so probably did about 36 to 37 in the 35 zone. So now passing a fixed distance signal board warning us to drive with caution, approaching the signals approaching Llandudno. And I certainly do recommend driving with caution, as when I did my first practice run on this journey, I actually had a spad approaching Llandudno station that almost resulted in a collision between my train and an AI train. So now at this point I've idled the power to allow the train to coast. I'm going to start braking soon to slow us down so I can drive with caution, approaching the signal protecting Llandudno station. So the signal that you just see ahead is clear. It's actually the following signal where there's a chance that I might actually have a danger aspect. But it actually looks like I'm slightly behind on time this time compared to the previous run, as I believe the train we're about to pass is in fact the one that I nearly collided with on the practice run. I'm still slowing down just to ensure that the signal's clear, and it is clear as we've got now a clear AWS. So there is a 15 mile per hour speed restriction coming into force very soon. As a result of that, I don't really want to be accelerating much along here, with the 15 limit coming into force just before the signal box, which I think I can see coming up just ahead. Just sort of around this right hand curve. I'm going to slow down to 15 here, as it looks like these points would probably have a 15 mile per hour speed restriction rather than a 50 mile per hour speed restriction, which is what the HUD says at this point. And now just allowing the train to coast along here as we head towards Llandudno station. I'm going to brake to enter the platform at around 10 miles per hour. And then gradually bring us to a gentle stop just before the buffer stops here. And so here we are, arrival at Llandudno. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, then please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, please don't forget that for the latest channel updates, you can find me on Facebook with a link to my Facebook page in the description of this video. And if you'd like to sponsor this channel, then please visit my Patreon page for more information, with the link to that also in the video description. And if you'd like to download and try this route for yourself, then I'm also going to post the link of where you can download this route in the video description. Once again, thank you for watching.